presentation to local preachers by Kate Ellis, 28th of November 2022. Well, here I am, almost at the end of my local preacher training. 24 modules involving 24 projects produced in 2 years and 4 months, in a course of 2 halves. One half being the completion of the first portfolio, pre-thyroid surgery, and the second portfolio, post-thyroid surgery. I've been looking over the services that I've been involved in during the last 2 years. I've been involved in services both online and in person. I've had the opportunity to preach both within Barton and Brigg circuit and Epworth and Scunthorpe circuit. This has meant being with familiar congregations and those much more unfamiliar. In between preaching, I've enjoyed visiting churches in both circuits to learn from other preachers and also to get to know people and feel more knowledgeable about context, preferences, practicalities of buildings and facilities. 2 of the services I have planned, led and preached at also involves me leading worship on my guitar. I've preached at an anniversary service, remembrance service, and yesterday at a parade, gift and all-age worship service. As I mentioned, I had a break from preaching, but whilst convalescing, I contributed to one of Bronwyn's services by providing the prayers. The pause that has been part of my local preacher training has not dampened my enthusiasm or commitment. I returned to service preparation and projects as though a released coiled spring. It's been quite busy since I got back on board in May. I've also been involved in services online with Coffee Shop Sunday, which is a Methodist-hosted online fellowship group, which was born during the lockdown. September to November has been particularly busy. Alongside my services, I have facilitated and led discussions and studies. I've recorded 6 Bible readings for Coffee Shop Sunday, facilitated discussions on Restore, Renew, Rebuild, the life of Nehemiah and the mission of Jesus, and also a discussion on Advent books. I've led 3 ladies' Bible study sessions with Americans as well as Brits. I've also been leading night prayer, Compline. I think I'm on my 29th this week. I incorporate themed prayers and have written some based on the psalm appointed for the particular evening service. I've also written 5 reflections for Worlow Spirituality Centre blog, 7 reflections for Coffee Shop Sunday Facebook, written a reflection for Coffee Shop Sunday's Lent booklet, and contributed to 18 prayers for Coffee Shop Sunday Lent and Advent booklets, which are disseminated locally and globally. I'm delighted to say that one of the sermons that I did in Brigg has been included in this publication, along with a poem. Although my training is coming to an end, I am aware that it is lifelong that I learn and that my journey continues. I joined the Nazareth community as a companion in May 21. The rule of life of the companions is that we are involved in silence, service, scripture, sacrament, sharing, Sabbath, and staying with. These all parallel with the Methodist way of life. Both encourage a rhythm of discipleship. And it is to a rhythm of discipleship that I've been most awakened to over the last 2 years. Being awakened seems very poignant as I consider Sermon 3 of the 44 included in sermons of several occasions. Thou that sleepest, or in a more modern translation, the title is Wake Up Sleeper. I was struck by it being the only sermon included, not credited to John, but to Charles Wesley, who preached it in April 1742. The inclusion of this single sermon not being his own feels very significant. It recognises the message of another, whilst not being as one might have delivered it, it's still valid, and much can be learnt from both listening to or reading someone else's sermon. John Wesley, in his action in including his brother's sermon, embodies Jesus' own example of humility, affirmation, and inclusion. I am reminded of the following quote. I'm sorry, I don't know who said it. You don't play the piano to show how good you are. You play to share the beauty of the music. You don't preach to show how good you are. You preach to share the beauty of the Creator God. Reading Wake Up Sleeper, I recognise how it communicates the traditional summary of Methodist teaching. All need to be saved, all may be saved, all may know themselves saved, all may be saved to the uttermost. The second sermon I ever preached received a comment that there were at least 4 other sermons within it. Looking back, I can see what was meant, though at the time the exegesis had been praised, but this time I was left feeling bruised and confused. However, I am consoled as looking at Wake Up Sleeper, it could easily receive the same comment about having numerous sermons within it. There are 42 scripture references, both from the Old and the New Testament, in this single sermon. Only a couple of them are used twice. In looking at the core text that Wake Up Sleeper is based on, I considered a few different versions of the Bible: NIV, NRSVA, the Good News, the Message, and the Amplified Version. Charles, in his crafting of the sermon, as does John in his, sets objectives and explains or defines, for example, who the sleepers are. There is a sense at the beginning of absence of confrontation and challenge, and that the aim is to explore together. However, Charles does convict the comfortable, as well as comforting the convicted. I have looked at a modern day translation and picked out 24 elements that could be reflected upon separately, just as a starting point. You'll be relieved to hear I have just listed them, as we don't have much time. One I was particularly struck by was alluded to on page 70, the restlessness that we all have until we find rest in God. It being akin to what Augustine's familiar view is and was. Wake Up Sleeper, if read aloud, would take about 30 minutes. There's a version on YouTube. I haven't timed my own reading. If it were part of a service today, I imagine many would feel that it was a tad long. If I were to use it as a basis of a service, I would consider hymns, songs, and music alongside. Awake, my soul, and with the sun, arise, shine, for your light has come. Darkness like a shroud. Oh, for a closer walk with God. Trust and obey. Wake, oh wake, and sleep no longer, and others. I would also look for other visual illustrations. I recently watched the film The Perks of Being a Wallflower. It is a coming-of-age film of awakening to self, place in the world, and relationships with and to others. but it also deals with reconciliation alongside enlightenment and many other challenges that resonate with many people. I would also consider using the sermon or crafting my own, not to be preached in April as Charles did, but in Advent. Having chosen which sermon to look at a few weeks ago, within a few days, I spotted the Archbishop of York's Advent book for 2022, Sleepers Awake. It is part of the Big Church Read and encourages reflection and action on getting serious about climate change. I list some here of the resources that I've used, the original and more modern translations of the sermons. But what is next? Alongside the book, which is part of the Big Read, Sleepers Awake, I'm reading some other books about faith and spirituality in later life. I feel nudged into exploring Anna chaplaincy and begin my training in February as I seek to learn how to support older people of strong, little or no faith, emotionally and spiritually. I am sure that the Anna chaplaincy training will enhance my role as a local preacher, as well as my involvement in ministry in the communities in which I am called. I am meeting a matron at Lindsay Lodge on Wednesday to discuss joining the pastoral team at the hospice. I am also keen to encourage more accessibility within churches as a champion of faith in later life and membership of Through the Roof Deaf Ministry, and also by learning from Torch Trust, whose training I have recently attended. Now it's over to you. Do you have any questions for me?